The Pacers lose again. My goodness, are they playing bad? Their defense is just atrocious. Talked to a bunch of players on the team about that. Plus, the debut of Jordan Nwora and George Hill, the new look Pacers, are still losing. We'll get to it all today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today we are diving into Pacers Jazz, another close loss for the Indiana Pacers, who cannot get a win right now. That is 16 losses in 18 games for this team. It's not even just to say that to be dramatic. They cannot beat anybody. They beat the Kings in a one-possession game. They beat the Bulls in basically a one-possession game, and they have lost every other game they've played since they beat the Hornets on January 8th. They've had a lot of close losses in there, and I've been thinking about that as a concept of how they've been playing recently. Not a concept, as part of how they've been playing recently. But it doesn't matter. 16-18 losses is brutal. Talk about how they lost the Jazz, their recent defensive skid. I talked to a lot of players about that, what they're doing wrong, what they can do better. And, of course, Jordan Nwora and George Hill, the new guys from the trade last week, debut for the Pacers. We'll talk about what they looked like a little bit, although it was only a taste and fraction of what they could be for this team. Or in George Hill's case, maybe a little more than what you can expect from him, at least minutes-wise, in games going forward. This one was all about defensive struggles for the Pacers, and their lack of consistency on that end killed them because, like a lot of games they've played recently where they don't get a win, they can score and play okay. They scored 117 in this game. Tyrese Haliburton had 30 points. He was making some brilliant plays down the stretch. These bigger Jazz players could not contain him, but they could not get consistent stops to go on a run. And I think that is displayed in many ways, but you can look at the longest run for either team. The Jazz had a couple runs of 6 or more. Their longest run was 12. The Pacers never even got close to that. The Pacers never led by more than 8. The Jazz led by 10 or more multiple times in the fourth quarter of this game. They just could do more because the Pacers could not grow their lead in significant strides. And this game was close for much of the game. It was within 8 from the start of the game until pretty much the middle of the fourth quarter. It was within 8, 3 possessions the entire time. So one big run would really have done wonders for the Pacers in this game, but they can't get enough stops to string that together, even in a game where they shoot 50% from the field, right? They shot 50.5%. They made 11 threes. They only turned it over 11 times, right? They did a lot of stuff that would make you think they won. They took 6 more shots than the Jazz, right? They did a lot of good things in this game. Truly, they did well in the possession battle. They couldn't get enough stops to go on a run. And then finally, the opposite happened where they did the opposite of get stops. They gave up and bled points like crazy. So they were up 90-89 right at the beginning of the fourth quarter. TJ McConnell stole the inbounds, did that McConnell thing, or stole a pass, did a McConnell thing. And they get a bucket, they're ahead, right? And in the fourth quarter, them being ahead with how they've been playing recently is a big deal. And then it was 90-89. 6 minutes later, right? 5:25 mark of that quarter. It was 108-96. So that was the opposite of what they needed. The run went the wrong way. The Jazz scored 17 points while the Pacers scored just 8, and that was the difference in the game. That you give up 17 points in about half a quarter, and you're toast. Their offense stalled a little bit in that stretch as well, but they could not get the run to get it done, and their defense once again remains a big issue. They could not stop the Jazz at all. And the Jazz are a good team, but not a team that should give you this many fits. So the Pacers are just kind of a broken team right now, and the defense is a big reason why. We'll talk about it a lot in the fourth segment. But to focus on this game specifically, there just wasn't enough oomph from Pacers role players is the best way I could describe it. Tyrese Haliburton was really good. If you listen to yesterday's show, one of the reasons I thought I had some positivity, and to be fair, Tyrese Haliburton did back up this point, but I had a little bit of positivity about the way they were going to play today against the Jazz, and then on Wednesday against the Bulls. Is we talked to Tyrese Haliburton after Pacers Suns. He said, I haven't been shooting enough. I haven't been aggressive enough. I need to hunt my own shot. And he actually calls it being selfish when he doesn't shoot enough, right? He's being selfish by not shooting enough, by almost playing in a different way that benefits him of being just exclusively a setup man. He needs to. It's better for the way he describes it is it's better for the team if he shoots more, and when he's not, he's being selfish. So Tyrese Haliburton knows he needs to shoot more. He shot more shots on Saturday against the Wizards, and he took 24 in this game. And lo and behold, that was great for the Pacers, right? He was 12 for 24 from the field. He hit 3 threes. He made all his free throws. He still had 12 assists. He had 3 steals, only 1 turnover. Right? He was awesome. He was a +1. They won his minutes. He had 30 points and 12 assists. That's a fantastic game, right? He was great. The rest of the starting 5, Andrew Nembhard was 1 for 2, right? He has been in a mega funk. I wonder. I can't figure it out. Maybe it's just that he's on other teams' scout teams now. Rookie wall. There could be many things, but he was more effective early in the season. Aaron Nesmith was good in this game, but Daniel Tice, who started for Miles Turner, had 11 points on 13 shots. Buddy Hield had a really off night. Right, his funk was kind of derailed, and he's such a rhythm guy that when he's thrown off, it's really painful. So they had one great starter in Nesmith, one great starter in Haliburton, and no one else really meeting the call in that group. So they had to mix and match, and the bench was not that effective either. Mathurin was solid, at least from a scoring perspective. McConnell did some okay things, although he had quite too many turnovers, more turnovers than assists from McConnell. It's never a good game. And so in general, they just couldn't get enough cohesive lineups together to be a consistent threat. And because they're already balancing offense and defense, especially because, and this is a big thing to note, in this specific game of Pacers struggles, Miles Turner, back soreness, he did not play. I bet they win this game if they have him, because they gave up a lot on the inside as usual. Something they've been doing so poorly is guarding their yard, as they call it. He can clean up a lot of those mistakes. That kind of stuff doesn't happen as much without him, but 50 points in the paint for the Jazz. They did a pretty good job getting into the lane to kick out for jumpers. Even though those don't count as points in the paint, they're still less easy to do with a good rim protector, right? Turner would help significantly, but especially because Tice, not the greatest defender. He's a little on the slow side. His vertical leap is not big at all. And then, Isaiah Jackson played very well. He played more than Tice. That was correct decision by Carlisle to me. Played very well, but he deals with foul trouble, and it doesn't have the offensive punch to be out there all the time. So they couldn't never get quite all the lineup they needed out there to go on that kind of run. With the lineup they had, the defense they were playing, and guys giving inconsistent sort of outputs all night, this is the Pacers team you're going to get, is Tyrese Haliburton doing everything he can, one role guy doing awesome in Nesmith, Mathurin playing pretty well. He was creating his shots, and no one else really meeting the call of what was needed of them to win this game, right? Jordan Nwora was okay in his debut, right? 3 for 8 from the field. McConnell actually shot well, but turned it over too much. Like, they had some okay performers that made it so they were passable at times with Haliburton off the court, right? They only lost the minutes without him by 7 points. It's not like awful, but they couldn't put together enough to get it done. And they can beat the Jazz. They have more talent to do it even without Miles Turner, but they didn't have it in this particular game. And it just kind of shows everything that is broken about them. Broken is such an extreme word, but when you lose 16 of 18, that's what you get from me. Kind of broken about this team right now is they don't, when I did a whole segment on this early in the season, when they were really rolling, November, just mid-December, late December even, they always had a role player have a really good game in their wins, and sometimes even 2 or 3. Now they're not getting that as much. Nesmith certainly counts in this game. 19 points was fantastic. He was a +13 in his 30 minutes. Aaron Nesmith was special in this game. He was their best matchup for Markkanen, but they needed one other guy to rise up and just be a force, a guy that Carlisle can turn to all game. There's a reason that only 2 players played 30-plus minutes, those being Tyrese Haliburton and Benedict Mathurin, because he was mixing and matching so much, trying to find some answers, trying to find an advantage against the Jazz, but he couldn't do it because they didn't have enough in this game, and that's been a big pitfall for this Pacers team for the last over a month now. Again, they have 2 wins since January 8th. This Pacers team is really slumping. They need someone to step up. They need to find some cohesion. And look, they've been in and close in a lot of these games, right? 6-point loss in this one. They lost to the Lakers by 1, right? They lost to the Heat by 5. They lost to the Magic by 6. They lost to the Suns by 5. They lost to the Hawks by 2, right? There's a lot of these games in this stretch, the Knicks by 6, that they were like right there, but they don't have the same clutch magicness without Haliburton. He hasn't been back to that same level in the clutch in these recent games. They're just a worse team. They need to find a groove, and soon. And the All-Star break is coming. That can help them get some boost, but the way they're playing now is just not going to cut it, and they're very, very close to falling to 13th in the East. It's possible that is where they are when the All-Star break comes. The Pacers need some juice, and maybe that can come in the form of their new guys, Jordan Nwora and George Hill, who both debuted for the Indiana Pacers today. We'll talk a little bit about what they did and their limited opportunities on the floor and the rotation in general with Hill involved. And rotation will kind of bleed into some Daniel Tice, Isaiah Jackson, in general discussions about the rotation. Before we get to that, though, I would like to talk to you guys about FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is here. Well, it's really past, but the unofficial midway of the All-Star break. And now's the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to points scored and threes drained, whatever you want to do. There's many examples. Plus, FanDuel lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets. You go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, check out Locked On Jazz with David Locke, the boss man of this Locked On Podcast Network, the radio voice of the Utah Jazz. I get to sit with him in radio section of these games when the Jazz are in town. Very fun to see how radio broadcasters do their thing. It is such a hard job. I have no idea how they stay focused on a million things at once and make it feel like you're there. And I actually was there, but even when you're not, such a hard job. He does a great job both with that and Locked On Jazz. Check out Locked On Jazz for his perspective on the new look Jazz, the Russell Westbrook currently employed team in Utah. Let's dive into the new guys making their debut for the Pacers. They did not play over the weekend, and we'll talk a little roster here as well. Remember, the trade was done. Serge Ibaka, Jordan Nwora, and George Hill to the Pacers. They had to cut 3 guys. They cut Goga Bitadze, who we'll talk about a little tomorrow. He's now on the Orlando Magic. Terry Taylor was cut, and James Johnson was waived. Then they waived Ibaka the next day to open up a roster spot to do what they did earlier today, which is sign James Johnson. James Johnson is back with the Pacers. Got to talk to him a little before the game. He sat with Tyrese Halliburton's mom at that home game against the Suns because he was in the crowd. It was like his first courtside experience for an NBA game ever because he's always played in the NBA in his adult life. And he said it was lonely and he was lazy for the 2 days that he was waived. But he's back. He's on the Pacers again. So that roster spot from Serge Ibaka has been filled. So effectively think of the trade deadline as trading away Goga Bitadze and Terry Taylor for Jordan Nwora, George Hill, and 3 second-round picks. I think that is a fair way to think about it without thinking about the financial parts of the deal as well. So that's what happened with the roster now. James Johnson didn't play, but he's back with the Pacers. They've got all their vets squared up for the rest of this season. The other 2 new guys, George Hill, Jordan Nwora, staying with the Pacers this season, ready to go today for the first time after a weekend of not being available to get up to speed with the trade pending, all sorts of that kind of things that has to happen before they could play. They were able to today. Very quickly, Jordan Nwora checks into this game. I thought that was pretty noteworthy. He is my second note from the game is that Nwora's debut is happening. It's hard when like the end of his first name ends with an N, and then his last name starts with an N. So it sounds like when you say Jordan Nwora, you're saying the N twice. Anyway, Nwora came in the first quarter. He was the second guy off the bench behind Isaiah Jackson, who came in for Daniel Tice. And so Mathurin, is usually going to be the 6th man, but he came in very early and clearly an effort to get him out there to some extent. He played 17 and a half minutes, right? So I think that looking at the rotation today, a couple things can stand out and be a factor here. But George Hill also played. And so thinking about the rotation for this game, you'd go, wow, if they're 10-man rotation, insert Miles Turner, one of the bigs doesn't play, but then their bench is now Nwora, Mathurin, McConnell, Hill. That's weird. It sounds like, based on how Carlisle was talking after the game, that more often than not, Hill's not going to play. He wanted to see what he had with George Hill, figure out how he can help this team. And, of course, rousing ovation for George Hill when he checked in from the Indy faithful, both in the first and second half, which I thought was pretty cool, right? Obviously, he was a key piece of those conference finals teams in the early 2010s. But he did play 10 minutes in this game, which really surprised me. I did not think he'd be in the rotation, especially that heavily. In Lou, Chris Duarte, and O'Shea Brissett did not play in this game. I think Brissett might be out for a while with Nwora in the rotation there. George Hill just had the one steal. That was his only statistical measure in about 9.5 minutes. And Carlisle did say after the game, right? He said, I don't know if he'll play every day. That's paraphrasing. That's not his exact words. I can't remember what they were perfectly, but it doesn't sound like George Hill's going to be a rotation player for this team going forward, but mixing him in there for now, see what he can provide, let him get out and play with this team, let him be in front of that home crowd for one game, whatever. We'll see who ends up with those minutes or how they end up getting shaken out. Maybe Nwora gets that spot effectively and Brissett plays. Maybe Duarte gets back in there and plays. Maybe guys shift up or down a spot and an extra big play. I don't know. There's a lot of ways it could go. It's not worth diving into until we just see what happens. But George Hill played. He didn't do a whole ton. He handled the ball fine. He didn't make any mistakes, right? No turnovers. Didn't look like he was a worthless defensive player, and had a steal. So that's good. No negatives is good, but not a lot of stats to really write home about either. But Nwora did play a decently significant amount of time, and I think that is noteworthy in and of itself, is that he's going to play. And he's kind of always said this since he got here. I just said that like he's been here a long time by saying always, but he's talked a lot since he's been here about, he can be a scoring piece for this team. And that's what George Hill said too, right? This guy can really score. He's an offensive piece. And when I was talking to TJ McConnell before the Suns game last week, he said, yeah, this guy's really good scorer. And he said, remember, he scored a ton of points against us when we played the Bucks early this season. And Rick Carlisle in his media session around the same time was like, yeah, he had 4 threes against us, right? This guy lit us up. So everybody's kind of had this high praise for his offense, right? And that's his thing. He can shoot it 39% from deep this season. Prior to joining the Pacers, could really score it at Louisville. His last 2 seasons there, nearly 20 points per game. Both of them. I'm rambling. The scoring part was not really something I was concerned with. He hit a 3. He hit 2 shots pretty quickly after checking in. Also got to the bucket for a finish and did a lot of okay stuff in this game, right? Finishes 3 for 8 with 7 points. That's not the efficient night you want necessarily, but certainly showed that he can score in many ways by putting on the floor. He's a little bit better as like a one dribble guy than a catch and shoot guy by the numbers. And I think that's going to be interesting to see how that allows him to fit in with a speedy creator like McConnell and a Matherin type who, sets you up for the really obvious passes. I think his quick decision making is going to be valuable in this group that he currently played with. 3 rebounds as well, 2 steals, 1 assist. Like did a lot of interesting stuff out there in his debut. Finishes with 7 points. I think he can be a threat with enough offensive firepower to get consistent minutes for this Pacers team going forward. And I'll just tease it now. Tomorrow's podcast, Jordan Tresky, who covers the Milwaukee Bucks, is going to join us to talk about Jordan Nwora and George Hill and what they can provide at this point in the season, what to expect from them, things like that. I think the best way to get perspective on those guys is from someone who's covered them, and especially in Nwora's case, seen their entire career. But the Pacers have now seen him, right? You have now seen him if you're a fan and you watch this game, and the offensive stuff was there, right? And that was the no doubt kind of thing to expect when he got out on the floor, is he's going to be able to find a way to get into the paint and get a shot up or hit a 3 if he catches with some space, or he can create a little bit of space from beyond the arc, right? Those are the skills you expect from him. What he talked about, though, is defense. He said, I know I can score, and guys have said they know he can score. I don't remember. He didn't say exactly that, but he said, I got to defend with this team. Defense is going to be important for him to stay on the floor and be impactful with this team. And he's basically got a crash course to catch up with an entirely new system, right? He said that the biggest change, or one of the biggest changes for him to kind of register, is the pace change, right? Not that Milwaukee plays slow, but compared to the Pacers, they do effectively play slow, kind of walk it up style with the guys that they have. The Pacers fly up and down, right? So that's a big adjustment, first of all. But I think for him, defense is going to be very, very important, right? At his size, he's uniquely positioned to be able to guard multiple positions, and not a lot of guys on this team are that size or can guard those positions consistently. A lot of them are better off defending guards or bigs. And so he's in kind of this Nesmith, Duarte, Brissett class of like, oh, they have the size to defend these forwards. Let's put them on there. But if he can do it well, or at least be switchable and effective and engaged, that's going to go a long way for this Pacers team who need guys at that position. I think his defense is going to be important. He did talk about it after this game, and the Pacers need defense to be something they are better at in general. So if Nwora can provide anything on the end of the floor, again, I think he reads the game well. I kind of talked about this with Derek Kramer last week. I think he's okay at like reading the game defensively, but not necessarily good at like staying in front of guys and being burly and tough on that end. I think he can get to being that, though, with a little bit better technique and more reps and playing. And that's something too that I asked him about after the game. Like, how helpful will this environment be for you? Like how it's been for Jalen Smith and Aaron Nesmith to go from a competitive championship team that you don't have a lot of room for mistakes to like a fully on development situation. He's like, yeah, it's going to be super helpful, right? So his defense was interesting and impressive in this game for a debut, at least, especially compared to expectations. And that's a really big thing to watch for him, I think, going forward. And in general, lots of coverage to come tomorrow, like I said, on these guys and going forward, right? They're the new guys, and Nwora specifically could be a piece for this team next year as well, or maybe even longer. The Pacers wanted him before they were able to get him. We'll see what his future holds with this franchise. But that's it. Game 1 in the books for the new Pacers, George Hill and Jordan Nwora. Coverage coming again on them on tomorrow's show. Let's close out by talking about defense. The Pacers defense is horrible right now. Gross, awful. They can't stop anybody. They're giving up 100 bajillion points to every opponent they play. Why? What can they do better? Let's dive in and get to the bottom of it. But before we do that, I got to talk to you guys about LinkedIn Jobs. As a small business owner or hiring manager, you know that success in 2023 all depends on the team members you surround yourself with. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. With LinkedIn Jobs, you can hire qualified candidates more efficiently by matching open roles with people who have the skills, values, and experiences to help you achieve your goals. LinkedIn Jobs helps you quickly attract qualified candidates to open jobs with targeting tools that go beyond resume data by using insights from your job post company and their 875 member profiles to put your post in front of the most qualified candidates. You can identify those candidates on LinkedIn Jobs and connect with them fast and for free. LinkedIn Jobs makes it easy to screen and rate applicants based on your job qualifications all in one platform. That's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering high-quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, lots of ways to go here. How about Locked On Knicks? Josh Hart looks good for them, and they just beat the Nets for the first time in like 4 seasons. Congrats to the Knicks for beating their rivals for the first time in a while. Check in on the Knicks with Gavin Shaw and Alex Wolf. They do a great job covering the New York Knicks. Let's talk about the Pacers and defense, or lack thereof, to be more specific. This team was rolling on defense. Like I have to stress this to people a lot, that when this team was at their best, they were defending pretty well. People did not. I don't think people gave them enough credit for this. There was about a month stretch from late December to about Christmas where the Pacers were a top 10 defense in the NBA. They were basically 10th, but that's still top 10. And that is when they were at their best. They were winning important games. They were winning clutch games. They looked great. Right? They were a good defensive team. They weren't just like an okay defensive team. They were like good on that end of the floor. And for much of the rest of the season, that has not been the case. And early in the season, they were kind of like chopping around 500. And much more recently, they've been one of the worst teams in the league. So defense is huge for them. And look, their offense has been pretty bad recently too. But they're really tied together for this team more so than other teams. I think that's sort of baked into their identity. If you're going to be this team that plays fast, wants to be in transition, flying up and down the floor, making these quick decisions, making teams run, you have to get stops and get rebounds to get into transition. They've been bad at both getting stops and getting rebounds recently. And I think that is extremely noteworthy as this team tries to correct course in whatever time they have left this season. Now, almost 60 games in, they have to figure out what they can do to defend better. And some of it is a couple things, right? Rookies hitting a wall and teams figuring out how to adjust to what the Pacers are trying to do. And this team losing a bit of mojo when Tyrese Halliburton went down to injury. In this game specifically, Miles Turner didn't play, but they've had a lot of reasons to have worse defense, but it shouldn't be this bad. To put the numbers actually in your head in front of you, since January 9th, which is the day after the Pacers beat the Hornets for their third most recent win of the season. So since January 9th, over a month and 5 days, the Pacers have a defensive rating of 119.5. That's 27th in the NBA. Here are the teams ranked 23rd and worse in defensive rating in that same span. The Hornets, who stink. The Jazz, who are going to stink. The Knicks, who are good. That's one of the two exceptions in this group. The Pacers. The Rockets, who are the worst team in the league. The Spurs, who have lost 14 games in a row now, I believe. And the Blazers, who somehow have also the best offense in the NBA in that same stretch, so that doesn't matter for them. So every team in that group, except for the Knicks, is in the bottom 5 or 4 of their conference. The Knicks are bucking that trend, and the Blazers are good. The West is good too. But either way, really bad defense for over a month of the season generally is done by teams that really stink, and that's been the Pacers recently. They cannot defend at all. Over the course of the full season, right, they're still kind of okay, right? Their defensive rating over the course of this full season is still 115.2. They're 0.1 away from being 21st in defensive rating, right? They're basically outside the bottom third of the league, right? They're over. They still have a lot. They're held up by some really good stretches of defense they legitimately played earlier this season. That's completely gone away. And I still maintain it's the same kind of issues they've had for most of their worst stretches of defense. And it all starts at the point of attack. The term they've been using is guard your yard. Keep your guy in front of you. Do not let penetration happen, because that's when everything gets out of whack. And so getting to the bottom of it, right? And look, you can explain the chain reaction a million times. Just to further refresher, if you get beat by your man on the perimeter, or you close out poorly and they shot fake and get by you, now someone else has to rotate over from their guy to help stop your guy. And then someone else is open. So if the pass goes to the open man, now someone else has to rotate off their man to the new man, and then someone else is open. And so eventually, like, two guys are switched, or you're not on your original defender, and all of a sudden it gets confusing on who's helping and who isn't, and who you're actually supposed to be guarding. And then there's a mismatch or an open shot or something like that, and it looks bad to like leave a shooter open or have this horrible mismatch. But sometimes it all comes down to the very first thing that happened, which is someone getting beat off the dribble or closing out poorly. I'm including that second factor because when we were talking to Aaron Nesmith in the locker room after the game, that's one of the things he noted, that I think he thinks they need to do a little better defensively to stop this penetration and stop the exact cycle I just described from happening, is closing out better, right? They're closing out short or too aggressively or just not well at all. And it's been really hurting them and allowing other teams to get penetration, create shots, and just be good. And so he thinks that's one thing the Pacers need to do better on that end of the floor. Better closeouts, better point of attack defense, things like that. But he said it broadly. Aaron Nesmith, is one of, if not their number one best perimeter defender on the team this season, he said, first step is keeping your man in front of you. If we can do that better, they won't have to cover for each other as much, right? And that's as simple as you can make it. They've had to cover for each other so much. I think some sites track blow by rate, but it's all paid for. I don't have it in front of me. I'd imagine the Pacers are very high in that. They do not close out particularly well, and they have a lot of guys who are not necessarily good at isolation on the ball defenders who can get beat off the dribble. The Jazz specifically have these giant tall creators, Lauri Markkanen, Kelly Olynyk, for example, who can beat you off the bounce, and the Pacers already can't contain those guys. They don't have the stockiness to do it. Tough matchup for them, but their defense has been really bad. I have stressed the point plenty, and that is where I think the crux of all their problems come from, is they have to become a more threatening defensive team if they want to get back to winning, right? When they were winning, they were giving up way fewer points. Duh. But just for example, let's go back to a familiar time when the Pacers were winning quite a bit more often, near Christmas, right? They beat the Heat. The game before Christmas, they gave up 108. They gave up 112 to Boston. They gave up 112 to Cleveland. They gave up 109 to the Knicks. They gave up 87 to the Heat. They gave up 104 to the Warriors. You can go on and on in this stretch of like successful wins where they are holding their opponents to low point totals. Mid-November, 113 to the Magic, 91 to the Rockets, 104 to the Raptors, 113 to the Hornets. That's kind of high. 109 to the Nets, 99 to the Heat. I'm just reading off random games at this point, but you get the idea. In a lot of these wins, you see their opponent total going low, whereas now it's 123, 127, 117, 122 by the Cavs. They're just giving up point after point after point. Their defense has to get better. And it's not just about that. I feel like I'm beating a dead bush with this point, but part two of this is a team that wants to run in transition and play fast. You have to stop the other team to do that. If you're pulling the ball out of the net, it's a lot harder to play fast. They still try. They run and get the ball out of the crowd. They're doing better at that in this game, and they still push in transition after makes. They actually punish the Jazz a few times for falling asleep in those situations. Credit to the Pacers for that. That's part of their identity. I think getting back to that will make them look a little more threatening, but you have to get stops and, in particular, rebounds to be more effective on that end of the floor. Carlisle pointed out the one-on-one situations being part of their defensive flaws in this game. Tyrese Halliburton talked about their poor defense kind of coming down to attention to detail, the small things. That's kind of how Carlisle's been describing it too. There's a lot that really has been befalling this team. Miles Turner talked about effort, and rebounding's been thrown in there by Rick Carlisle. I could go on and on about the number of things people have said are the biggest problem this team has defensively that they need to correct. But the fact that it's multiple answers kind of just details how poor the Pacers have been defensively in the last month and week, basically. The month plus week stretch. Basically, they have to defend better. They have to keep guys in front of them, sit in the stance, do not let this penetration happen as easily. so the snowball effect can be limited so that other teams cannot generate these easy shots, and so that these numbers don't keep ballooning. They're among the worst teams on defense in the league, and it's starting to cost them wins and mojo and so many other things. They must defend better, and yes, some of it is that they don't have the most talented defenders, but with mostly the same team, they were defending much better earlier this season. They've got to be better on the end of the floor if they want to win some games. So we'll see how this ends up going for them, but right now, the answer is very poorly. They've got to defend better, and their offense is not particularly awesome either. Tomorrow's show, 2 segments with Jordan Tresky from the Win in 6 podcast, talking about the new guys, right? What did he see covering them in Milwaukee? How can they help the Pacers? What kind of skills they have, potential in the case of Nwora. The first segment, talk about Goga Bitadze. Specifically, what went wrong in his era? Why did he not succeed with the Pacers? What were the decisions made that did not make that work out? And he's in Orlando now. Maybe he'll find some minutes there that could end up working out well for him. They are a pretty big team, that Magic team. But that's coming tomorrow. And then they play the Bulls, and it's the All-Star break. So we'll talk all sorts of broader topics during that time off. Looking forward to it. I'll be on a trip, so I'll do my best to get podcasts out during then, of course. But it'll be really fun. And all the content on the show always is. Hope you guys enjoyed today's show and enjoyed the game if you were able to watch it. We will see you tomorrow.